All right, so we're looking at lesson 7 here. We're going to be able to determine the equations of our polar graphs. We've been working the other direction. If I give you an equation, can you graph it? Now it's going to be looking at a graph and coming up with the equation for your polar curve. All right, so just a little review of all the different curves that we've seen. A circle, we can have 3 different kinds of equations. We have r equals some number 2, 3, -5. That's a circle that has the center at the pole, and then the radius is that number. You could also have r equals a cosine theta or r equals a sine theta. If r is equal to a cosine theta, then it's symmetric about the polar axis. If a is positive, the circle goes to the right. And if it starts with a negative, then it goes to the left, but it's symmetric over the polar axis. If r equals a sine theta, then it's symmetric over theta equals pi over 2. If it's positive, the circle goes up. And if it's negative, down. All right, some of the other basic ones we've done was lines. Lines come in r equals c over a cosine theta plus b sine theta. You could also have r equals a over cosine theta. Those are your vertical lines. R equals a sine theta, horizontal lines. Or theta equals some number that is a rotation in either radians or degrees. All right, then we have various Limassons. So remember, Limasson equations, r equals a plus or minus b cosine theta, or r equals a plus or minus b sine theta. And depending on the values of a and b, it then becomes one of your different types of Limassons. So this one here is an example of, an inner loop. That occurs when a over b is less than 1. Okay, the one to the left here is a cardioid. And that's when a over b equals 1. Then we have the dimple. And that's when a over b is between 1 and 2. And then the no dimple or inner loop. That's when a over b greater than 2. All right, we also have rose curves. Remember, the general is r equals a cosine n theta, or r equals a sine n theta. If it is cosine, one petal is on the polar axis. N, if it's odd, then it's the number of petals. If n is even, then 2n equals the number of petals. And A tells you the length of the petal. All right, and then our lemniscates, r squared equals a squared cosine 2 theta, or r squared equals a squared sine 2 theta. Cosine 2 theta, like all the other ones, will be symmetric over the polar axis. And sine will be diagonal. And remember that how far out it goes is a. All right, so now we're going to come up with the equations. So you want to be first be able to identify what type of curve it is. So if we look at this one, this is a circle. So the equation, because it's symmetric over the polar axis, would be cosine. So r equals a cosine theta. So that means we just need to know what a is. A is this full length from the pole out. So if we count out, that's 8. So it'll be r equals a, or 8, sorry, cosine theta. All right, when we get into a Lima Sun, which is the next one, you do have to classify what type of Limasson, and since this has the inner loop, we just call it inner loop. And it's symmetric on the polar axis, so that'll be in terms of cosine. So r equals, and it's coming out to the right, so a plus b cosine theta. Remember how far along, in this case, the theta equals pi over 2 will be your a. So that's 3. And then out here, this is a plus b, and that would be at 9. So that means b has to be 6. So it'll be r equals 3 plus 6 cosine theta. Okay, next we have a rose. Pedal on the polar axis, so cosine, so a cosine n theta. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 petals. So that means 2n equals number of petals, so n is 4. And how far out it goes, looks like 7. So that's a. So r equals 7 cosine 4 theta. All right, next, lemniscate. Since it's not symmetric over the polar axis, this will be sine. So r squared equals a squared sine 2 theta. A is how far out. So that'll be 6. So r squared equals 36 sine 2 theta. All right, again, a nice little summary here again for you to peruse. All right, so now we're just going to classify a couple curves. We're not going to do all these. So you have to recognize the structure of the equation. So this one here, since it's r equals a sine, and that would be an n theta, you're really looking at a rose curve. When you have the addition or subtraction, you know we're dealing with a Limasson. Right, so it's r equals a minus b cosine theta, and since 5 over 5 equals 1, it's a cardioid. All right, next one, if we distributed, it'd be 3 minus 6 cosine theta. So again, we're looking at a Limasson. A over b is less than 1, so now we'll have an inner loop. If you got the r squared, you're dealing with a lemniscate. Remember, lemniscates come in r squared equals a squared cosine or sine 2 theta. For E, when you have the division, that'll be a line. That's your general form there. So those are lines. And then the last one, when there's nothing in between there, no addition or subtraction, you're just doing with A cosine theta equals R. That's your circle. All right, so what I'd like you to do is try those out, and tomorrow we'll go over the answers.